The following video discusses starvation, food scarcity, and horrible pig monsters. Viewer discretion is advised. In literature and philosophy, hunger has a contradictory status. On one hand, it's a force that humiliates, debases, and reduces its subject to mere animals. Hunger lowers us to the status of beasts, but it's the very thing that powers our greatest accomplishments. It can eat through stone, overthrow a corrupt society, or make even the most bitter morsel taste sweet. Indeed, if it were not so obviously and so intimately connected to our physical bodies, we should think of hunger as a supernatural force. The idea of hunger reducing us to the status of beasts, and the horrors related to that idea, will be the subject of today's adventure. Welcome to PhD&D, everyone. I'm Dr. Bowers, and today we're going to discuss the Ravenloft Domain of Dread known as HENNA, a morbid theocracy whose starved citizens are forced to worship a god of hunger, on pain of being magically transformed into beasts themselves. As with all my Ravenloft videos, we'll discuss what this domain is, list some media to help us get an imaginative grip on the domain, and then sketch out an adventure. In our case, the adventure will take place across 4 acts, and it will take PCs from levels 2 through 5. That is, PCs will finish the adventure at level 5, and with DM's permission, level up to 6 at the end. This adventure takes maps, monsters, and other elements from the 2014 Monster Manual, Dragonlance, Shadow of the Dragon Queen, keys from the Golden Vault, Baldur's Gate, Descent into Avernus, and Where Evil Lives, the MCDM Book of Boss Layers. Before we get started, though, what is the Domain of Gehenna? Well, born of a Barovian family, Yagno Petrovna went missing upon the slopes of Mount Gakis as a youth. As a violent storm rose, he took shelter in a mysterious ruin and was found wandering the hills weeks later, babbling about an amber idol and the god he'd discovered, Zakata, the provider and the devourer. His family sought to help him, but when they discovered Yagno secretly sacrificing people to his fictitious god, they chased him into the mists. When Yagno emerged, the domain of Gehenna sprawled before him. Life is hard in Gehenna, a rocky land home to fierce, starving animals. The domain's people worship a bestial god, Zakata, and regularly travel to the cathedral city of Zukar. There, they offer their crops in sacrifice and hear Zakata's will through the words of the revered prophet, Yagno Petrovna. Okay, so as described in Van Richten's guide, Gehenna is a rocky, wind-swept land of velds and steppes, where half the population are starving humans gathered into a cathedral-like city of Zukar under the rule of Yagno Petrovna and forced to worship a god of hunger. The other half of the population, having been transformed into bestial creatures by Yagno himself for alleged impiety or blasphemy, roam the wilds in marauding herds. This domain goes all the way back to the 2nd edition of Ravenloft, where it's stipulated that Yagno has the power to transform any of his subjects in a religious ceremony into a weird bestial creature. More on this later. It's worth noting that this Ravenloft Domain of Dread called Gehenna is not to be confused with the plane of existence called Gehenna in D&D's implied cosmology. Instead, it's a domain of dark fantasy and body horror, and to get an imaginative grip on it, we're going to appeal to a few choice bits of media. The first bit of media is the 1908 novel The House on the Borderland by William Hope Hodgeson. This beloved classic is one of the first examples of cosmic horror, but it also has elements that we'll want to take and use for our Gehenna adventure. First, the very beginning of the manuscript, which constitutes the majority of the novel's text, is striking. It involves traveling through space to an alien world in a hallucinatory vision, and then encountering an ominous creature which foreshadows real dangers to come later. We're going to take that initial beginning and use it to start our adventure. Second, the monsters from this novel are absolutely fascinating. They're anthropoid swine creatures with a very alien nature, and they're fun to visualize. In the older editions of Ravenloft, when Yagno transformed one of his subjects, that subject would turn into what's called a mongrel folk. And while the idea of transforming subjects into beasts is fascinating and a cool thing to work with, the particular choice of monster I think is uninspiring, and it also has a problematic name. So we're going to actually take these creatures and replace them with the Swine-things from the House on the Borderland. To that end, I would recommend the swine monsters from the 2015 video game Darkest Dungeon. They're an excellent point of inspiration, especially later in the adventure when PCs will confront groups of them that are armed. In addition, when thinking of the domain of Gehenna, I also find it instructive to consider the 1922 story by Franz Kafka, A Hunger Artist. In a land so immersed in starvation and the shortage of food, where starving oneself and fasting is seen as not only religious devotion but kind of a admirable achievement, I would assume that there's something like hunger artists in Gehenna, and indeed we're going to put those in Gehenna in our adventure. I also recommend the 1977 story Children of the Corn by Stephen King, particularly because of the weird nature of the corn cult, and also because the protagonists begin their adventure by stumbling upon a murder scene. We're going to incorporate that into our adventure as well. The 1984 film adaptation isn't bad, and you might want to take a look at that as well. I also recommend the 1982 film The Beastmaster, particularly because of the character of Mayax, the evil priest. I think that if you take the character of Mayax and sort of focus on how he talks and how he acts, it's a great inspiration for a character like Yagno Petrovna. Take that scene where he sacrifices kids by throwing them into a fire and sort of take that vibe and use it when describing Yagno doing a similar sort of thing when in a ritual he converts one of his subjects into a swine creature. I also recommend taking a look at Sedlec Ossuary. This is a medieval church or church-like structure in Europe which is largely constituted of human bones. It's a grisly thing to behold, but also pretty cool. And in earlier editions of Ravenloft, Gehenna was described as having a culture where people decorated things with the bones of their starved family members. So I imagine there's a lot of decorations all around the domain which look like the sorts of things you see in Sedlec Ossuary. And finally, there's the 1995 second edition Ravenloft adventure Circle of Darkness, which takes place in Gehenna and features Yagno Petrovna. We're going to take elements from this and weave it into our own Gehenna adventure, but it's not going to be just a simple conversion or an adaptation. Alright, with our imaginative grip secured, let's sketch out our adventure. In Act 1 at Level 2, the PCs are somewhere outside of the domain of Gehenna. It could be another Ravenloft domain, it could be the Prime Material Plane, it could be wherever. As they prepare for a long rest, strange things happen and they suddenly suffer a weird vision together, a vision which transports them to Gehenna. There, they battle some strange monsters and come across the scene of a murder, one for which they are quickly accused and taken prisoner. In Act 2, at Level 3, the PCs must escape captivity, and as soon as they do, they must lay low in the city of Zhukar, a city devoted to the beast god Zakata, god of hunger. They can have some exciting encounters there, but it's only a matter of time before they are caught again, and this time they are conscripted to sabotage the efforts of a heretical priest. By doing this, they avoid further imprisonment or execution, but must be banished from the city afterwards. In Act 3, at Level 4, having completed their mission and been banished from Zhukar, the PCs wander Gehenna's wide and trackless steppes until they come across some kind of hovel. It turns out to be a base for swine creatures and a cult that worships them. There is nowhere else to go. The PCs must engage with these things or else starve in the wild. And so the PCs must fight their way through an exciting multi-layer dungeon featuring all kinds of swine creatures and a couple of human cultists. What the PCs find inside is disgusting and a real example of body horror. But they also find something which may be their key out of the domain. Finally, in Act 4, at Level 5, the PCs must explore and battle their way to the domain's very misty edge, where, equipped with a magic item that they found in the Swine-things fortress, the PCs have a chance to escape Gehenna if only they enter the mists and face a horrifying boss monster. So let's go over this adventure in detail. In Act 1 at Level 2, the PCs begin somewhere outside of Gehenna, either in the Prime Material Plane or in another Ravenloft domain or somewhere, and they're getting ready for a long rest. As their candle or their campfire burns low, it suddenly takes on a blood-red color, and then with a flash, turns bright emerald green. The PCs find themselves floating upward, 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 through forest canopy and roof alike, as though they were immaterial ghosts, up past the stratosphere, up past the surface of the Earth, and up into outer space until they can see their own planet dwindling, getting smaller and smaller, along with its sun and the other planets. The PCs float through space, past misty nebulas and weird stars. During this time, while the PCs are floating out in space's blackness, they must each succeed on a DC 12 Constitution save or take 1d4 cold damage. Soon the PCs find themselves descending an atmosphere of blood-red clouds, down to a planet with blood-red soil, into a wide and flattened plain, which is surrounded by mountains and giant idols in such a way that it feels like an arena. The sun overhead appears to be a ring of red fire surrounding a black sphere. And in the very center of this arena is a strange-looking temple with a pulpit at the very top. But there's something else here too. A huge creature which looks like a naked ogre, except for the fact that it has a swine-like or warthog-like head. It immediately attacks the PCs and fights until its apparent death. At that point, the PCs once again lose control of which direction they're traveling in. They float off the ground and into the recesses of that strange temple. Everything goes black. Moments later, the PCs wake up from a long rest in a strange land. The terrain is broad, flat, and dry, like a veldt or steppes. Nearby, there's a creature stooping over a corpse. The creature looks like a miniature, human-sized version of the enormous swine-thing that they fought in their vision. It has the statistics of a jackal-were, and it is joined by 3 others, which leap out in the disintegrating morning mist. As for the corpse, it appears to be the dead body of a red-robed priest, slashed and gored with claws and tusks. The 4 swine creatures either fight to the death or fight mostly to the death with the remainder fleeing. And once they are defeated, a squadron of red-robed priests that are dressed in the exact same way as the corpse, except for that they're not dead, arrive on the scene. There's a dozen of them, and half of them are riding giant spiders, and they have an empty prison wagon in tow. We're going to give these priests the statistics of Skull Slashers of Merkel from Baldur's Gate Descent into Avernus, and they immediately accuse the PCs of murdering their comrade. Should the PCs mention the swine creatures, the priests show no interest whatsoever in this topic. Instead, they pronounce that the PCs are under arrest and try to get them into the prison wagon. The PCs could surrender willingly, or, because the priests are so numerous, they could just knock the PCs unconscious and take them by force. A fact which the priests themselves could point out. In addition to accusing the PCs of murder, they also accuse the PCs of hoarding food, which is a blasphemy, and they immediately confiscate any food from the PCs that they can. Once the PCs are locked up in the prison wagon, the train turns around and heads towards a city in the distance. As they roll into the city, the PCs level up to 3, and we proceed to Act 2. In Act 2, at level 3, the PCs begin in a jail, stripped of their weapons and their equipment, which lies nearby outside of their cells, with the exception of their food, which has been taken. For this part of the adventure, I would run Wheelwatch Outpost from Dragonlance Shadow of the Dragon Queen. I would have the PCs start out in area W6, with their gear stored across the room. Make it so that the PCs are the only prisoners, so get rid of the Kender and get rid of the Calaman soldier that are written to be there. I would remove the Dragon Army officer as well to give the PCs a chance to try to escape on their own. And if the PCs are unable to free themselves, have an NPC, a rogue named Hylas, show up and help the PCs escape. Hylas tells the PCs that they have arrived in the city of Zhukar, a city dedicated to the worship of Zakata, the beast god of hunger. Hylas can serve as a sort of exposition as the PCs try to escape. Speaking of which, once the PCs leave Area W6 and proceed into the courtyard, Area W1, we're going to keep the statistics the same for the Dragon Army soldiers and the remaining Dragon Army officer. We're just going to describe them as armored red-robed priests instead, priests of Zakata. To balance things out, we're going to get rid of the Sivak Draconian, reduce the number of soldiers by 2, and replace the Boz Draconians with just human cultists from the Monster Manual. These cultists are adepts, studying for full priesthood. Assuming the PCs can raise the gate and escape the fortress, they find themselves in the city of Zhukar. The streets are full of starving people, and the PCs can easily slip away amongst the crowd, escaping any pursuing priests. Once they're in the city, PCs should notice 3 ominous things. The first is human skulls. They're everywhere. Skulls and human bones are everywhere, decorating everything, from the archways that mark the entrance to buildings, to capping the tops of street signs, and more. Second, periodically on street corners, in cages, PCs can find emaciated people who display their gaunt figures and who advertise how many weeks they have been starving. These are hunger artists, the most devoted of the devout citizenry, and they are widely admired. These hunger artists can beckon to the PCs and talk with them, telling them about how great the god Zakata is, how glorious it is to starve oneself and to master the flesh, and so on. Finally, here and there, protruding from heaps of human bones, PCs can find statues and idols dedicated to Zakata. This god looks like a bipedal wolf with ram's horns and bat wings, and it's often represented as devouring human beings by the handful. Now, at this point, the NPC Hylas tells the PCs that he has other things to attend to, and that he'll be in touch, but that he must leave for now. He then slips in between some people in the crowd and is not seen until later. Now, the PCs do not have any food because it was confiscated, and if they ask around, they soon discover that nobody sells food. Indeed, the very request is met with disgust and concern. Commoners will tell the PCs that there is a grain dole, and that the priests appear every other day to feed the people. The PCs can get food that way. Whether the dole is a long line that people must wait in, or whether people just gather as a crowd and the priests throw bread out to them, that's up for you to decide. I could see it being fun either way. PCs can also find an inn and check in, taking a long rest, but the innkeeper will warn them that they do not allow food to be taken inside their sacred walls. No eating allowed, as it were. As the PCs explore the city, they should eventually notice an enormous temple, which looks exactly like the temple that they saw in their hallucinatory space vision. The PCs might not approach it at first. You can have them explore the town and run various encounters there. The PCs can hear rumors and learn about the land. In particular, they're going to find out that the priests are the law of the land, and that lawbreakers, including people who don't worship properly, are frequently kidnapped or jailed, and sometimes they are taken to the very top of the temple, where Yagno transforms them into a hideous swine thing in a horrible and frightful ritual. Those swine things are then thrown from the top of the tower and, if they survive, flee into the wilderness. Now, when the PCs approach that temple, assuming they do, it just so happens to be on an occasion where Yagno is preparing to conduct a ritual. A crowd joins the PCs and assembles at the base of the temple, and then Yagno appears at the pulpit which crowns the temple's apex. The crowd cheers, Yagno silences them with a gesture, and then, in a charming but passionate and emphatic voice, Yagno preaches that Jakata is the god of hunger, not the god of gluttony. He preaches that there is no such thing as Jakata the provider. There is only Jakata the destroyer. He promises that in the Netherworld, those who defile Jakata by worshipping him as a provider will find their souls shredded 1,000 times across the true Jakata's many spiked gullet. But before that happens, he thunders, these blasphemers will be punished in life. For behold! With that, Yagno beckons a pair of priests to come forward, and in between them struggles a prisoner. It's Hylas, the rogue who had helped the PCs escape from prison. Without even mentioning his name, Yagno rakes his fingers across Hylas's chest and face, and Hylas in turn shrieks and shrivels, and twists and deforms into a swine thing, just like the one that the PCs saw in their vision, but miniature. Indeed, just like the 4 that the PCs fought when they first woke up in Gehenna. Having been thus transformed, the priests throw Hylas from the tower, he lands with a sickening thud, and then gets up and flees. Should the PCs manage to catch up with him or try to interact with him, he does not recognize the PCs. He acts like a wild monster and does everything possible to escape, including fighting back. He does not speak, and indeed, it seems like he cannot speak. Now, if the PCs tried to interact with Hylas, this brings the attention of the guards, which quickly surround the PCs and arrest them again. Only this time, they don't take them to jail, they take them to Yagno himself. If the PCs don't interact with Hylas, however, and try to stay low, they will still eventually be found by the guards, who are on the lookout for the escaped prisoners, and the same thing will happen. Then, under heavy guard, in shackles, the PCs are brought into the temple before Yagno himself, who says that the time of their arrival in his land is auspicious, and that perhaps the god Jakata has brought them here in order to serve a great purpose. He takes some time to debate theology with the PCs, ask them if they've ever heard of Jakata, ask them about Jakata's nature, ask them what they think the most excellent sort of god would be, and he always answers them in a sort of condescending dogmatism, where he insists that his own lore and religion is superior, but pretends to be interested in what the PCs have to offer nonetheless. After a while, Yagno tells the PCs that a heretical high priest, Rega, is worshipping Jakata the Provider, a blasphemy. Worse still, there is rumor that Rega, in isolation, is trying to summon Jakata the Provider. This cannot be. Yagno admits that he could send his own priests to apprehend Rega, but he doesn't want to provoke disorder or disunity among his flock. Instead, he thinks it would be better if outsiders did the work for him. Yagno asks the PCs to break into Rega's mansion and destroy the idol that Rega is using to summon a false god. Yagno promises that if the PCs do this, they will escape jailing, they will escape execution, they will escape being turned into swine things. Instead, their only punishment will be banishment. He pitches this as a good deal. And, just to make sure that the PCs don't disobey him, he casts Geas on each one of the PCs. Now, all of this is set up for you to run Reach for the Stars from Keys from the Golden Vault, and that's what we're going to do next. We're going to skip the prologue stuff, since the PCs got their mission from Yagno Petrovna, and we're going to change the character of Marcos to the heretical priest Rega, who wears red robes. We're going to change the fragment of Krokelmar to something that Rega believes to be Jakata the Provider. We'll change all the references accordingly. During Rega's summoning ritual, we will still have a tentacle grow hideously out from the neck of a decapitated body. That's just cool. After the PCs thwart Rega and complete their mission, they head outside the mansion and find scores of Yagnos priests ready to escort them to the town's edge. Assuming the PCs leave, they reach level 4 and we proceed to Act 3. In Act 3 at level 4, the PCs are banished from the city of Zhukar and must find their way in the wide and trackless velds of Gehenna. As they travel, it isn't long before the clouds darken, the wind picks up, torrents of rain begin to fall, and the PCs encounter a huge black cyclone. It's actually a kind of air elemental unique to Gehenna. It has the statistics of an air elemental, but its size is gargantuan, and it attacks the PCs immediately. After the PCs defeat the cyclone, the air returns to a calm state, and through the clearing atmosphere, the PCs can glimpse a building from which a curl of black smoke rises. There's nothing else but the wide veldt and the random encounters that it holds, so the PCs have every reason to be curious about this. Now, the building is actually a multi-level dungeon, but the top floor makes it look like it's just an inn or a dingy tavern of some kind. In fact, it is run by depraved humans who have tamed or befriended swine-things, and who have learned that the swine-things grow more intelligent and more evil as time passes. These humans worship the swine-things as divine, and they allow the mature swine-things to cut off and eat some of their appendages, fingers, toes, ears, noses, etc. And once the smaller appendages are gone, these depraved humans allow the swine-things to feast on larger portions. Now, this tavern actually conceals a subterranean base of operations, where human cultists serve an army of swine-things. And this army has come to outnumber them. So when the PCs enter at the top floor, the assembled humans and swine-things attack. Casual investigation reveals that both human and swine-thing were in fact drinking mugs of blood, not ale or wine. Now, for a map of this place, we're going to use the Hanging Tree, which is a level 3 dungeon from Where Evil Lives, the MCDM book of boss layers. We're going to keep everything the same, but we're going to describe the orcs as being swine-things. We'll also describe the humans as missing fingers, ears, noses, and we can say that a half-eaten finger or a half-eaten ear still lies on a plate near where one of the swine-things was seated. I would draw upon the pig monsters from Darkest Dungeon, specifically in the Warrens area when you're thinking about the swine-things in this base, and make sure that you replace all foodstuffs in this base with human flesh, like obviously human flesh, like arms and legs and gross stuff like that. And to keep an appropriate vibe, in the lowest level, I would keep the statistics of the dinosaur thing the same, but I would describe it as being like a giant scorpion or something. Or maybe like a giant Gila monster. We'll say that the boss monster is a highly intelligent swine-thing warlord who has the same statistics as the orc boss for the Hanging Tree. Now, when it comes to the actual treasure which the PCs can find in the basement, the psi lenses are wrapped up in a document, and this document describes how if somebody takes the psi lenses and they enter through the mists at the very edge of the land, there's a chance that they may be able to escape this horrible place. By which they mean the entire domain of Gehenna. The document cautions, however, that if someone enters the mists with these lenses, they will encounter a hideous, undead monster, and it is only by defeating that monster that escape is possible. Once the PCs find these lenses and read this note and they clear out the fortress, they level up to 5, and we proceed to Act 4. In Act 4, at level 5, the PCs make their way to the land's edge, whose mists alone promise escape. As they do, they are attacked by a battalion of red-robed priests riding giant spiders. And we're going to run Escape from Steel Springs from Dragonlance Shadow of the Dragon Queen. Just describe the Dragon Army soldiers as wearing the red robes of Jakata's priesthood, and replace their warhorses with giant spiders. Let the fray surround the whole battlefield until those priests are defeated. And as for battlefield events, replace the first and third events with the emergence of a newly created swine creature, which has the statistics of a jackalwere and which attacks immediately. Also replace the Dragonelle, which drops a Calaman soldier, with a giant bat, which drops a dead swine thing. Once the PCs defeat the priests and make their way to the land's edge, where there is a wall of grey Shadowfell mist, they can enter while one of them is holding the magic lenses. Should they do this and they make their way through the misty expanse, they eventually come across a huge wall of jeering animal skulls. And mixed in with the animal skulls are the bones and limbs and rotting effluvia of various corpses. The wall is infinitely high, and it sinks into the ground infinitely low. As soon as the PCs interact with it, it warps and changes its shape, and turns into the exterior wall of a 60-foot wide room which encircles the PCs. This creature, which the PCs face, is a living wall, a horrible nightmarish creature from 2nd edition D&D, which we are going to put right in this adventure. When it comes to this living wall creature, I highly recommend checking out a video by the YouTuber Dungeon Dad, and Dungeon Dad has been nice enough to include some statistics which work for this particular encounter. Note that Dungeon Dad's living wall is a CR 7, and right now the PCs are CR 5, so be aware of that, and you may need to tweak a couple of those dials, as Sly Flourish says. It is a horrible monster. One of the things that it can do is grab your PCs and pull them in and absorb them and turn them into part of itself, and then use their powers against the remaining PCs. It's grisly, really excellent body horror. And once the PCs defeat this living wall, they are free to continue into the mist, which takes them somewhere else, perhaps to another Ravenloft domain, or perhaps to some other area entirely. Regardless, this adventure comes to a close. So that's our adventure in Gehenna. What do you think? It's a strange domain, and it really leans on the themes of dark fantasy. What do you think of the idea of putting a heist adventure in the middle of it? That's what Circle of Darkness did, that old 2nd edition adventure set in Gehenna. And what do you think of the use of the Swine-things and the house on the Borderland as an inspiration? Let me know in the comments. Thanks very much for watching. Don't forget to do all the internet things, click like and subscribe. Don't forget to hit the bell icon if you want updates on this channel, notifications about new videos, and more. And thanks!